What is up, guys? Teddy Cornwall here. Welcome to the Underdog Talk, the world's most underrated podcast on earth. You see him today in his studio. He's got a nicer studio than us. We don't have a studio. I mean, this man is taking over the internet by storm. I'm just gonna say it, Liam. And I was trying. Hopefully, I pronounced your last name correct. DeBoer. Was I
Yeah, you
close?
got it. Yeah, that's pretty
Okay.
great. That's good.
Okay, yeah, because I even saw you pronounced it out on your Instagram. I was trying to get that right. But Liam, welcome to the Underdog Talk, man. I'm love what you do, and before we kind of get into this podcast, would you mind talking a little bit about yourself? How did you get into where you are? What's your background like? Yeah, if you mind telling a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, no worries. So I'm a Canadian, live just outside of Toronto. Grew up here. Honestly, pretty normal childhood. Middle class family. Nothing crazy, but also no hard underdog story per se. And then yeah, 20. I'd say around 2015 or so is when I just started getting peripherally interested in philosophy, history, just kind of started thinking about that kind of stuff. And then in the COVID era in 2020, it was about, I'd say 6 months into COVID is when I kind of just from philosophy, history, psychology, all this kind of stuff, I could kind of start to see the formations of what I knew to be totalitarianism. And from there on, I just started kind of speaking out, and people seemed to take an interest in what I said, and just been going ever since then.
Yeah, and as I told Liam off air, I'm really excited because I'm an American, and my knowledge of kind of the politics and the workings of Canada are not really there. So when you talk to me, Liam, if you could talk to me like Canada for Gummies, but no, and I also watched some of your videos, and you got some very interesting points and some very you know very unique views. So if I'm right, is Canada a constitutional monarchy?
Kind of. Yeah,
Okay.
technically. So, I mean, the monarchy is more symbolic than
Okay.
anything now.
Okay.
So, in the 1970s, or it might have actually been, sorry, late 70s, early 80s, we officially split from Great Britain
Okay.
and became an autonomous country. But we still kind of go through the same charade per se. And even, for instance, we have somebody in our government known as the Governor General
Mhm.
who signs all of our laws into effect, essentially runs them up to the king to get their approval to put them into, it's called royal assent, to actually make something into law, kind of like what Congress would pass. And but so we still do that, but like they don't have any actual authority over us anymore.
Gotcha. And obviously, the big news, and even us Americans know, obviously, Mark Carney was, just elected as the 24th prime minister. And as someone who's very knowledgeable in all this, I'm interested here. Why do you think he got elected? Obviously, it was definitely kind of a comeback, a surprise. Why do you think the Canadian people voted him into power?
So I can go over kind of a whole year backstory here if you like.
Yeah.
It's that whole story about, yeah, our election is pretty wild.
Yeah.
So it essentially, that election was just all one big run at sweeping a scandal under the rug.
Hmm.
So back in October of 2024, it was found by our auditor general, so
Yep.
somebody within the government that's tasked with overlooking just programs, making sure everything is following ethics and that sort of thing. Sure, she has other responsibilities as well, but that's one of them at least. And she found that we have a program where it's $1 billion a year program, and it's supposed to spur investment into green development and
Hmm.
sustainable technology. Well, she found that out of that $1 billion annually, so this is just in a year, $400 million went to businesses connected to people within the Liberal Party who was governing it and in charge of handing out this money. So 40% of $1 billion fund was just getting shoveled into friends' pockets. And they started demanding the documents behind the procurements and such for this fund. And the Trudeau government at that point, who was the leader of the Liberal Party, froze Parliament. So, which is kind of our Congress. It would be kind of congruent. It functions differently, but and froze that, couldn't function anymore. And then in November, we broke for Christmas at the end of November. And then January came back around. So they get a month off for their parliament. Then January came back around, and it finally was looking like the writing was on the wall that Parliament was going to throw Justin Trudeau out of office.
Yes.
And then so he resigns, and everybody obviously heard about that. And says he's going to resign and prorogues Parliament. So that's another way to freeze Parliament again. So all of this is essentially just freezing it so that they can't throw them out. So it's now been 3 months that our entire federal government system is just being roadblocked to make sure that the Liberal Party doesn't get thrown out. Then they hold, through this freezing period, the prorogation, they hold their Liberal leadership race to get Mark Carney in as the Liberal leader. So that goes until March, and then he gets instated, and then they hold a federal election. So this whole time government's paused, and all of it was just in order to shut down this scandal where it was found hundreds of millions of dollars were being looted from the taxpayers, which, so it's crazy that, and then perfect timing that Donald Trump came in and started targeting Canada, which gave our media class, which is entirely funded. Like, if you think the government funding and stuff of media down in America is bad, it is way worse in Canada. And so all of that was just government funded narratives going about the Trump stuff. And so Trump essentially won the Liberals the election in Canada. So it's and here we are.
And I was going to ask that, do you think if Donald Trump became the United States president, Carney would be in? I mean, obviously, Carney talks about, Trump wants to break us so America can own us, and getting kind of the people going in that aspect. If Donald Trump had lost the election, do you think Canada would have looked different?
That's a really interesting question. I think it's hard to say, because this is the thing, is that Canada very much has a lot of pride in being this progressive and like so borderline socialist. I mean, I call it socialist. Some people would probably argue with that, but I mean, our government is responsible for over 50% of our GDP, roughly, like spending wise, a year. So like half of economic activity in Canada is government spending, which is crazy. So I would definitely say that we're a socialist country. And actually, it's really interesting if you look at our history of the parties that have ruled it, pretty much going back until about 1900, you get these long dynasties of liberal rule, and then eventually people get fed up. They're somewhere in the neighborhood of around, they usually last around 10 years. So I thought this one was potentially coming to an end. And then they usually have 4 to 6 year stints of conservative kind of, they call interludes, and then kind of snaps back into another liberal reign. So, I mean, we typically head that way. I know America, it's a lot more of kind of that 50-50, but there isn't much of a conservative subculture here. And for instance, even our conservative party, they're not very, like, they would, if you looked at their policies, they would still be very in line with, say, even a Democrat party down in the States. So our whole Overton window politically is shifted far to the left of you guys.
And the one interesting thing I found is, according to some data, I don't know how accurate this is, 18% of the 18 to 29-year-olds were worried about Trump. That jumped to 45% in Canada, to voters over 60%. Why do you think the younger generation, I guess, didn't care as much for the Trump administration, or worried about the Trump administration, as the elderly population in Canada?
I think it's twofold. So one aspect of it is where people are getting their media. So young people are definitely tuned out of cable TV and all of that kind of stuff, where it's definitely the boomer class that is taking in our state-funded media heavily on repeat, and that's their only source as well. So, and again, it's not like the States where now I don't even enjoy watching Fox News, but you've at least got a counterbalance down in the States where you've kind of got, like, say, the CNN versus Fox News.
Yep.
Canada does not have that. We don't really have alternative medias. Like, so 80% of our media, 75% of journalists in Canada are state funded. 80% of media outlets are subsidized by the state. 90% of the media that Canadians consumed is funded by the states. So there's this huge conflict of interest within our media class when it comes to actually, like, even you think about it, why would they ever say truly come out against the government or say cuts on spending or any of this sorts when that would just pull back their own subsidies? They'd be hurting their own wallet in that sense. So that's definitely one aspect as to why there was that divide. And then the other aspect as well is, so over, and this, I'm sure this is very similar to down in the States, is over the last decade or two, when inflation has gone through the roof, asset prices have gone through the roof as well, right? That's what inflates. So a lot of these boomers have had their housing values skyrocket, and so their net worths are going crazy. So they don't really have a big reason to care about the cost of living. And actually, a lot of that data is definitely accurate when it comes to kind of Canadian polling. I mean, as accurate as polling can be. And then so you look at it's not only that the youth didn't care much about the whole Trump situation, it's that they predominantly cared about the cost of living, and that was one of the boomers like least cared about. So it's I don't know, that's definitely a two-pronged way as to how that all unfolded.
No, I think you explained that very well. And I mean, is that why you kind of wanted to start questioning mainstream media, because of that divide in terms of obviously the media in Canada? And did you feel like this is something you should, set out to do, a calling for you, Liam?
Not really, to be honest.
Gotcha.
So yeah, when I made my first video, so a little bit even more backstory into me, I guess, then is I used to be involved in music industry, and went to school for audio engineering and that kind of stuff. And then that's what my passion was before COVID. And I saw the writing on the wall that was gone. And I just know I'm somebody that needs a creative outlet. So I started picking up video work. I bought a camera, and I just thought when I bought a camera too, it wasn't even really to make content. I never used social media all that much beforehand. And my goal was just to maybe I'll make some extra cash making some videos on the weekend for weddings or whatever, this kind of stuff. And then so I'd been starting to learn how to make videos for other purposes. And then it was during the lockdowns that I had this one conversation. Like, this was early 2020. And like, I think we were probably only 3-4 months into the whole ordeal at this point. And I was talking to friends and family just about things that I saw happening to people as a consequence of the lockdowns that I didn't feel like were getting talked about in the news at all, like mental health and stuff. Or I had friends that lost a job. I had one friend in particular that went to drug trafficking after losing a job. And I saw this other guy that lived above the restaurant I used to work at in Toronto. And he was this very successful dude, and I could watch him because I was lucky enough to keep my job as a manager at this restaurant, but I could watch him, he was a corporate lawyer, highly successful. And just in the months after the pandemic, it got to the point where he was buying a 2.6 a day, showing up with a black eye, and we eventually just were like, okay, we can't. But so like his whole life went to shambles. And so I just saw this kind of side of things that nobody was talking about.
Yeah.
And I made just an impromptu video. I just sat down and started talking to the camera, and it was just about the human toll of lockdowns. And this is at a point when it was like, no, 2 weeks to flatten the curve. Like, this is the only acceptable position to have. And then I started getting people reaching out to me from all over the world. I had people in England even reach out to me off of that first video. And again, like at this point I had like 800 followers. It was kind of like friends in high school thing. I didn't expect to public. It was just kind of a message to my friends, and it ended up getting out there. Like nothing crazy. It didn't go like viral or anything, but I just started talking about the stuff that I didn't feel like anyone else, that I felt like everyone was seeing, but nobody was willing to say. And so my goal has never really been to make this like massive societal shift as much as it is just for me to understand what's going on. And then also for these people that see things that they don't hear being talked about, like the human cost of the lockdowns, not feeling like they're insane for the fact that nobody else is talking about it, like kind of giving them some reassurances of just being like, hey, you know, you're not crazy for kind of thinking this way. And so that's been my goal the whole time. And a lot of it has just been go with the flow. So it's been pretty crazy to grow to the point where now we reached like last month after with Jonathan, my business partner, Blender, and myself, between our three, like our little network, reached like 24 million people last month. So it's crazy to think about that. So it's nuts.
Yeah, and I saw Blender. I'll put that in the bio. And Liam, what role do you think kind of independent creators like yourself play in reshaping how society processes the truth?
Well, I think it's going to, especially going forward, I think through this whole AI revolution, if we manage to keep our heads about us, I think it's going to completely wipe out the middlemen. I mean, we've already been seeing that a little bit, where there's been these institutional gatekeepers. Like, so for instance, if you wanted to be a news reporter 20 years ago, you would have had to have been AOK'd by a network and hired on and kind of, you know, played the hierarchy game in a corporation. But today everybody is their own publisher. I mean, this goes even beyond even just news and media as well, but you know, music, people can just make an album in their own basement. I mean, I was doing that. I was making albums in my apartment that sounded great, and you know, you can publish them yourself now and put that kind of stuff out there. So I think we're just gonna kind of enter this world where, yeah, I don't really see these massive conglomerates lasting. And I also think that as these trends shift, both technologically and just our cultural leanings are changing on a day-to-day basis so fast. Everything, just the pace of change is just ramping up to this crazy rate that maybe we can't even keep up with. But I think it's going to be these individuals and small organizations that are able to remain nimble throughout that will be able to hang on. Because even too, like our media in Canada, I talk about the government subsidized media, it's dying like crazy. They don't have viewership. The CBC, our Canadian Broadcasting Company, which is a government-run organization, they get $1.5 billion a year, and their viewership is still going down. So it's just like, I just don't think they're adapting to a new game that's being played. They're trying to play an old game in a new model. So
yeah, that is an interesting take. And you know, earlier we talked about the president of the United States. As a Canadian, what are your thoughts on Donald Trump? I mean, do you have any thoughts on him at all, or does it not affect you?
It definitely, definitely affects us, even though our election, became Donald Trump.
Yes.
Yeah, it's this thing where I've never felt like a hard affinity or support for Trump. I'm always of the mind where I find it extremely weird idolizing people in general,
Yeah.
whether they be politicians or like even when people get extremely emotional about celebrities. So I've kind of always fallen outside of either or, which is, you know, just how there's this kind of concept of Trump derangement syndrome, right? There's this other side that is definitely like Trump worshiping syndrome. And then I feel like there is a sizable amount of people that kind of sit in the middle and go, yeah, I'm on the fence, and there's certain things that I can go against the grain on, and there's other things that I can get behind. I think the one thing I will say that I actually definitely, it blows my mind, his ability to shape the conversation. So for instance, even the fentanyl stuff in Canada, at the border in Canada, that is an issue that I've been talking about and focusing on for a year or two, like really getting into the nitty gritty, how this stuff is coming from China, how this is like geopolitical strategy. It's the fentanyl crisis is not merely a cultural byproduct. It's a military strategy. And so in the fact that like as soon as Trump came on the scene and started talking about that, all of a sudden the whole world is talking about whether, you know, and there's people in Canada disagreeing with his statements on how involved we are and all of this kind of stuff, but he at least made the conversation about that. So that's always what I've found most intriguing about him, is his ability to just say, no, we're not talking about this nonsense anymore. Like even the whole like the trans debate stuff, all that kind of stuff is just, nobody really is talking about this anymore other than the extremes of each side. But now it's pretty much whatever he wants the world to talk about, the world talks about. It's crazy.
Yeah, and I think the one thing is that cult following, like you mentioned, it is very interesting. And you know, you had a video where I watched, it was actually really fascinating, is where you're talking about Canada is a country run for criminals or by criminals. Would you mind kind of talking more about that concept and what that means, Liam?
Yeah, so I mean, this kind of goes down to also my base philosophy in a sense on a lot of this, which I find it very hard to separate the concepts. Like if you think about the government and organized crime, technically, it's very hard to find a difference between the two of them. Like even just the very fact that the government cannot operate without the constant extortion of taxes, and this concept that if you don't pay your taxes, we just all accept this, that if I don't pay my money to this institution, they'll throw me behind bars for the rest of my life. Like people will think that's very an extreme way to phrase taxes, but if you actually think about it, it's definitely the most accurate way to consider it. Now, I think there's a very valid argument to be had about, without the existence of a centralized government, you would just have a bunch of differing bands of warlords and stuff. But so I'm not a full anarchist per se in that sense, but I at least hear their argument. So what I try to do a lot is try to reframe people's understanding of what government is and how it operates, because I do want to think about it just strictly as centralized power, and it is just monopoly of force, right? And so when I say that it's their, Canada is a nation run by criminals for criminals, what I mean is I just don't see any distinction between the two anymore. So even if you look at, the money laundering is what Canada has become extremely famous for internationally. If you look, anybody can Google something known as the Vancouver model. So this is now known as this concept is now known within the international criminal justice community as a way that international funds within cartels and stuff move around, is because it's been so prominent in Canada, which is the way it works is, China is the main perpetrator of this. So the Chinese triads in China with Chinese businessmen will take their money. Like, let's say a Chinese businessman wants to get $1 million out of China. He will give that cash in China to the cartels. That businessman will fly to Vancouver, and that same cartel will give him a duffel bag full of cash, the same amount that he gave in China. So now he has his money in Canada, and that cartel member then goes to the casino, plays a few hands with that money, cashes it back out, essentially has cleaned his money in our casinos. One thing to keep in mind there is our casinos are government ran. So all of our lottery and gambling is done by the state. And so they're profiting off of this. And there's a great book called Willful Blindness by Sam Cooper. He's the preeminent journalist on all of this who details this out over decades. But essentially, our government was like, well, we're making money off of this at the casinos. So this, allows us to have more funding as the government. So keep it rolling. And then once that money is clean outside of the casinos, they take it and put it into things like real estate is pretty much the number one thing they'll put it into. And so this is why Vancouver real estate, and this is why it's called the Vancouver model, is because a lot of these empty houses and stuff in Vancouver are really just the byproducts. They're essentially assets from drug money, and which is crazy that the number one issue driving our housing crisis in Canada is this money laundering. And so if you take money laundering, which is conservative estimates are 45 billion a year as of 2018, and they've done nothing meaningful to shut this down. So I can only imagine it's worse now. And then high estimates are 100 billion a year. So if you take low estimates, money laundering is a top 20 industry in Canada. If you take high estimates, it's a top 10 industry. And our government is complicit in every stage, from the casinos, from they're working hand in hand. Justin Trudeau was holding private meetings with a guy named Paul King-Jin, who was the number one criminal in Canada, or at least thought of by our law enforcement agencies for this money laundering scheme. And so we've got our politicians connected with them. And then also there's another guy in the Liberal Party as well. This is wild one. His name was Randy Boissonnault. He was a member of parliament, and he had a business with a guy named Stephen Anderson, and that business shared an address with somebody named Francesca LeBlond, who was an international drug smuggler. She had been detained just months prior in I want to say it was Dominican, and with 460 pounds of cocaine. And so, you just look at that and you go, okay, how does this all work together? This is kind of the whole nation run by criminals for criminals thing. If you look at Randy Boissonnault in particular, I'm just putting the pieces together. They share an address with an international drug smuggler, and you've got his business partner who's running an import company. So they're bringing things in internationally, shipping wise. You've got them sharing an address with an international drug smuggler. And then you've got somebody like Randy Boissonnault, who's politically connected and can make sure that, certain eyes get turned certain other ways. And you just look at this all along the country. There's just so many different examples of what I'm talking about, whether it's the Trudeau private meetings things, whether it's Boissonnault, whether there's even a large investigation that was going on into the money laundering scheme called ePirate. Actually, even American law enforcement agencies were involved in that to some degree. And it all fell apart from the inside when essentially they leaked information about the witnesses And so you go like, yeah, how does that get out? That the witnesses, obviously this was intimidation. And so I think it's organized crime in Canada is completely baked into our operating system at this point.
Jeez. Do you think how can Canada become, I don't want to say great again. How can Canada improve on where it's at now? What are the steps that need to be taken, in your opinion?
I think the first and foremost is corruption. And, this is where, like, I'm not even a conservative. It's funny because I talk so much about the Liberal government here in Canada. People consider will label me a conservative, but I never even really considered myself very political, even before all the COVID stuff. But so I think that it transcends party lines, the corruption, and I think this is very much just the nature of government. But I think you need to see something like what happened down in El Salvador with Bukele, in terms of a crackdown on crime. Like, it's really bad, and it's not to the point where, I mean, actually, you know what? I can't even really say that anymore. That you don't just that murders in the street aren't happening, because they are becoming more and more prevalent. Even just the other day, it's so crazy. There's this one organization. They're called the Calistanis. They're an international terrorist movement. From the 1980s and 90s, they were trying to establish an independent state in India, and India cracked down on them, and their movement essentially flooded to Canada and started taking hold here. And actually, I just saw a video yesterday about one of the Calistani members was shooting up a building. And so, like, these things are getting very crazy, and they fund their political aims through drug trafficking. This is what's so crazy about the whole political world and stuff as well, that, like, I don't think a lot of people see, is that how these different ends end up working together, whether it be organized crime, business, and government. Like, it's a web that kind of all interconnects. And so you've got, say, this Calistani group that their main thing is a political movement. They want an independent state in India, but then they will do things like crime in order to fund their political aspirations, which they then do through above boards in businesses, and kind of have their front facing operations as well. Same thing happens with China. I mean, CIA has worked with many mobs and stuff in the past, but I think this is just a long-winded way to get back to your original question, is what needs to happen in Canada is you need to break up that actually what law enforcement agencies have dubbed the unholy trinity of government, business, and crime. And so I think, yeah, you need to launch a full Bukele style investigation into government officials. And that's really where it happens, is that's where the crackdown would need to happen, is to actually out people that are corrupt within our institutions. But that's a tall order, because it's a long list.
Now, Liam, in your opinion, if you have someone, who is the person that is most suited for the role of prime minister in Canada? I mean, who is that in your opinion, or has the person come yet?
Well, I think the person in Canada, and this is what's so interesting, is because you can't really have this. Not to say that you need somebody that is exactly like Trump or anything here, but as soon as you get that person that starts to quote unquote go to war with the system, they're just going to get slandered by all of our media as being like, this is just Trump 2.0 in Canada or whatever, right? So they almost block it before it can even happen, that there isn't really this large public appeal for it. And like for a counterpoint to the establishment. But I mean, we've got Pierre Poilievre, who is definitely more along that mind, as far as, I mean, he was the only one leading up to the election that was really putting a focus on crime. And also he was the only one that was, I actually really liked this idea, was that a lot of the times when there is a conflict of interest that happens within the Canadian government that gets caught, it's pretty much just like a slap on the wrist. Like they nothing really happens to them. Maybe they get their made fun of in the media a little bit and they have to go through the ringer that way, but there's no real consequences. But he was wanting to start implementing fines. I believe they were like $10,000 just for like conflict of interest kind of stuff. But at least that would start to put things in the way of this rampant corruption. So yeah, Pierre Poilievre is decent. He's still the conservative leader of the federal party, but what I think was interesting was he got a lot of support in Canada because he was kind of going hard against the Trudeau government at the time, pointing at the corruption, really going after them. But as soon as the election started, it was almost like he took the spotlight completely off of this rampant corruption in our government and rather just started trying to appeal as the family man and, put his, which I'm not saying isn't admirable, to be like, hey, I'm a normal guy and this is where I grew up, but he took the edge off completely. And so I don't know whether he really has the bite per se when the time becomes necessary to actually really go toe to toe with those kind of things. But there's also the Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, who I think is really great on that. She definitely has she's got a lot more of a backbone than I think most of the conservatives in the country that would actually be willing to push back on a lot of these things.
Wow. And do you see Canada ever, or in your opinion, going in the right direction? I mean, obviously you talked about possible changes in terms of that. Do you think it's going in the correct direction now? I know what you're going to say, but do you think I'm trying to phrase this. Do you think it's going in a worse way slowly or faster than it's getting better, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I'm at the point where both my business partner and I are like, all right, let's maybe just go. We're both of the mind where, hey, I'm not going to sit here and bang my head against the wall in this country. And if this is what the country wants, then so be it. Like, I'm not gonna. I just won't stick around for it. So we're looking at heading out. I mean, a lot of other Canadians are as well. So I think actually we just had numbers come out that in the first quarter of this year, I think it's the second most in history that that people have left, whether it be permanent residents, citizens that are leaving the country, and also wealthy people. So we have this kind of trajectory where you've got your tax base leaving and we've got more and more spending happening federally and at all levels of government. So I think that is a very big issue. However, the one thing like I will give Carney a lot of credit for is that he does seem to be taking a lot of the virtue signal kind of nonsense out of the governing, and he's even starting to try to fast track certain infrastructure projects and such that at least actually we were just talking about it on our podcast today. The best way to look at it is it's like, okay, we had a government that was corrupt and was trying to profit off of tax dollars that were being put into dying or just injuries that were never going to take off, like say solar panels and this kind of stuff. And so they were enriching themselves off of very bad projects. But now it seems like they're just going to enrich themselves off of kind of more traditional infrastructure and energy projects. And so I'll take that, because at least at the end of the day, that's useful to Canadians if their energy gets cheaper, not more expensive. So there is little things like that that I think is that a lot of, say, the counter culture in Canada, the little of it that we do have, I think I'd give them a little bit more credit than most would in that regard. But this is actually really interesting about the difference between Canada and America as well, that I think really differentiates us in these sorts of times, where America was founded through revolution, right? So it was a country established by fighting and violence and by self-assertion, whereas Canada was established because it was kind of like this patchwork of leftover colonies that nobody really knew what to do with anymore. And so the French and the English were just like, all right, you guys can kind of just govern yourselves now. And then 60 years went by where we were like part of the British Empire, but we were mainly self-sustaining. And then in the 80s, as I was mentioning, we became like autonomous. And then, but so it's kind of like we're just like a country that has just kind of appeared. It wasn't really ever like hardcore fought for and established. And so I think there's less of a will here to kind of fight for it in that sense. So I think that's maybe the less hopeful idea I have on that, where I look at Canadians and there just doesn't really seem to be much. Like, if you ask most Canadians here, actually, I have a friend that immigrated here, and he mentioned that when he would talk to Canadian people about culture and traditions and, like, what should I be expected to portray as a new Canadian?
Yeah.
Like, nobody could really give him an answer. And so I think that lack of Canadian identity is definitely a real issue here. So that's one of those things where that's a big factor of me being like, all right, maybe this isn't the place for me anymore, then, is because I want to go somewhere that has a little bit more and not like a hard nationalism or anything, but like a little bit more pride to be to actually try to be proud of who they are. And I feel like definitely America's got that for sure.
I was going to ask, and before I ask my final question, where would you go? Obviously, we see Americans leaving, and Canadians are leaving. Would America be a place where you see yourself going?
Yeah, especially with what we do now with the media stuff. Asked me 5 years ago where I would have gone other than Canada. There's definitely certain parts of America that would have piqued my interest then, but I would have probably been more online with somewhere like a Costa Rica or something 5 years ago. But now, for business and entrepreneurial reasons, I would look more towards America, whether that be somewhere like Florida or Texas. The lack of state taxes is very, very appealing there. So yeah, but it's crazy. I think this is one of those time periods, man, where I don't think it can be very daunting for people and very stressful. I try to remain in a state of curiosity and intrigue about it, and more so just like awe. Yeah. But we're living in a time period that is very similar to, say, World War II, where the world order is being reshaped. And so over the next couple of years, I've been trying to just keep of the mind of being like, all right, be light on my feet and see how the cards fall over the next couple of years, how things shake out globally, to see, which areas end up kind of having the upper hand, because there's no way you can know. There's no way you can really know what, like, how those cards are going to fall.
Yeah, and actually that kind of leads perfectly into the final question I wanted to ask you. If you could leave one message that outlives you, Liam, what would that be?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I think the most important thing is and this is something I actually am definitely going to work on getting out there a lot more, which is more philosophical than political, which is mindset of just constantly taking on burdens and not becoming bitter because of them. I find that not only, I think that is actually the basis for a strong and functioning society is one of individuals who embrace responsibility, because even if you look at these totalitarian states, whether it be the Soviet Union, whether it be Nazi Germany, and even whether it be some of these more theological states in, say, the Middle East, all of it is a complete rendering, a complete disillusion of the individual and into the collective, which at the end of the day is an offloading of responsibility. And so that I'm still trying to work out how to make that more palatable and connect to people on a deeper level. But I actually think that's like the fundamental basis of a functioning and healthy society.
Wow. Now, Liam, obviously, where can we find you? Obviously, you're on Instagram. I saw you were on TikTok. You have your own platform as well. Is that a podcast that you do?
Yeah, so we have a news network, which
Okay.
is kind of like just more so commentary. Although we do write original articles and stuff, just not super frequently.
Yeah.
But so we do a newsletter that goes out 5 days a week that we just kind of summarize the daily news. Then we have a podcast that goes out once a week. We make social media clips pretty much daily, and that is all through Blender News, Blendr News. You can find that on blendernews.com. And then, yeah, on pretty much all social media is Liam Out Loud, and that's my personal stuff. But yeah, all very interlinked there between those two. And the podcast title is on any platform that you can find. It's Blender Report.
Blender Report. And you know what? First 5 people to subscribe to Blender Report, send me a DM. We'll get you a $25 gift card out there. Check out Liam's content. All that will be in the bio. Liam, it was a pleasure speaking with you. I love where you're coming from. I think you have some amazing content and some great thoughts as well. Guys, please don't forget to check out Liam's content. Again, that'll be in the bio. And first 5 people to follow Liam's podcast, $25 gift card out to you. And Liam, again, honor, privilege, and hopefully everything goes well for you guys. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on this video. Until next time.